Here's a special important message.
All right, hello, welcome to a brand new podcast called We Are the Road Crew. My name's Stephen Hill, and I am your host for this series of podcasts, which looks into live music in its most glorious form. I'm a massive music fan, and through my work as a music journalist over the last few years, I've been lucky enough to be able to see most of my favourite bands from not in front of the stage, like many of you who buy a ticket and go along and aren't a media scumbag like me. But also I've been lucky enough to hang out backstage, and I've always been fascinated from my very, very early years about the kind of the lure of live music. There's something about going to see music in a live environment which I've always found fascinating and magical. And it's not just, the chance to see, some of my favourite bands ever performing up on stage. It's also, the atmosphere, the smell of the venue, and the lure, the anticipation, the sort of mystery of what happens behind the scenes and how those gigs come together. So this series of podcasts is a podcast where we will be delving in and trying to interview some of the people who have not just known those backstage areas, but actually are responsible for some of the biggest names in music getting on those stages and performing some of the most legendary gigs that have ever happened. And I think today we start off strong, because our guest today is a gentleman by the name of Peter Hince. He is the author of a book called Queen Unseen, My Life with the Greatest Rock Band of the 20th Century. Peter, from 1974 to 1986, he was head of road crew for Queen. So Peter is in an incredibly unique position that he saw the growth, the birth of Queen becoming a monster of a band, one of the most beloved, iconic bands in the world. And he was there for all of those iconic things that happened to Queen over the years, the drugs and the parties, the wild experimentation in the music that they made, the dips in their career, and then of course, as we'll probably speak to him about later on, that incredible performance. As I said, one of the, talking about some of the greatest, most iconic live shows ever, doesn't get much more iconic, doesn't get more legendary than Queen at Live Aid, and I'm sure we will talk to that. And then we'll talk to Peter more about how he got into the business, and maybe demystifying a few of the myths for you, if you've ever been fascinated about thinking, what exactly do roadies do, how exactly do these shows come together, what are the stories that I'm missing out on while I'm stood in the crowd holding my beer watching these bands, exactly how did that thing happen? That is something that this podcast hopefully will try to explain to you. So without any further ado, a man with some serious stories. I was very, very lucky and honoured to be able to sit down with a gentleman who has seen some of rock's most iconic moments happen right before his eyes, and was more than happy to talk to me about it. Really, really hope you enjoy the podcast. As I said, it's called We Are the Road Crew. Do subscribe to us on iTunes, leave a review, and you can find us at Road Crew Pod on Twitter. You can find us on Facebook as well if you want to contribute at all. Really hope you enjoy the chat. I'll speak to you again at the end and do a little debrief and maybe remind you to subscribe once more. But for now, here is me talking to Mr. Peter Hince. Peter, Thank you so much for coming on and being our first guest on the podcast. Very much appreciated. How are you?
I'm pretty good, thanks. I'm still alive, which is a bonus for people from rock and roll days. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, the second you walked in, for those of you listening, we're actually recording the podcast just off of Oxford Street in London, and you were straight away remembering exactly what it was like back in those days of the 1970s as a club. You said the Speakeasy around the corner from here.
Yeah.
Just sort of very quickly, not to rehash what you were just saying, but you were saying it was a very, very different time to the kind of place and the way that celebrities can behave today.
It was, the Speak, as it was known, it was literally, a few yards from here in a basement, and it was the kind of musicians hangout and roadies hangout. And I don't think they had official membership. You just kind of showed up, and if they knew you or you worked for Bowie or, whoever, it's like, oh yeah, you can come in.
Yeah.
And you would just see, your favourite rock stars there, but no one bothered anyone. no one had any minders. It didn't exist back then. It was a totally different kind of world, and people went there just to listen. They had bands on. I mean, no one I'd think of any note, but maybe when they were younger were played there. I'm not sure if it's where Hendrix played when everyone wanted to hear him back in the 60s. It may have been. But yeah, you would go to the Gents and you could literally hang out with your favourite guitar player.
It's an incredible time.
It'd be like, there's Jeff Beck and there's Clapton, and you look down, well, it is true about him. It's true about you as well, mate. But yeah, and it was just a very different time, and I think it was open till about 3 a.m. or something, which was unheard of. I mean, pubs closed at 10:30 back then.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and it was just a very different kind of, relaxed era, even though, you had some fantastic music. And
wow, I mean, this is the thing I think that I find quite odd about what's happened to London and what's happened in the sort of modern era with the lack of venues and the amount of venues that are closing down, the lack of opportunities for bands, is that people reminisce so much about that period and talk about how magical it is, and that appears to be why someone would want to come to London. And yet here we are, we spoke about Denmark Street, which has been turned into shops, and the buildings have all been changed, and it feels like it was a place where London at that point, certainly with the type of people you're talking about, had a real identity and a place where you could flourish as a musician.
Yeah, as you say, it was the place to come, and that's why people came from Scotland, from the northeast, from Birmingham, whatever, all those bands of that era, because I mean, very close to where I live in West London was the Greyhound, which was a gig, the Golden Lion in Fulham was a gig. I mean, bands used to play everywhere, and you used to look in the back of the Melody Maker, and all these bands were on, and they're all bands, if you get an old Melody Maker, that, were big bands, and they were playing in, sort of pubs, clubs, small venues, and every week, it was great, and it was kind of, used to go and see bands all the time. It's like, oh, who should we go and see, and there was always someone on. I mean, I've been out of the business now for, 33 years or something. And my understanding was that the live scene was good now, because people don't sell albums because everything, it's all downloaded and plagiarised and pinched and robbed and whatever.
Yes.
And my understanding was that there was a good live scene and that bands have to be able to play now. I say I don't know, because I don't go to gigs unless it's someone who I know and they give me a free ticket or something. But
I think it's certainly harder for bands to break into those kind of venues that do still put music on. I think that is, there's sponsorship issues and there's different ways of getting in. So I think it is harder if you're an upcoming band to actually just get out and play. Whereas, for your generation, to my generation as well, to a slightly lesser extent, but to my generation as well, bands could just get gigs, which I think is, great. And obviously, we're here, probably worth talking about when you got the bug for music. I mean, do you remember your first live show? I think that's a really kind of memorable, visceral moment when you first see a band on stage.
I mean, I can remember when I was a kid and listening, to the Beatles and the Stones on the radio, and then eventually, my family getting a second-hand record player. And the first single I ever bought was Sonny of Sonny and Cher, a song called Laugh at Me.
Right.
Because I think my mate who lived up the road had got I Got You Babe, so we could, I could play his and he could play mine. That's what you used to do. You used to try and buy records that your friends didn't have, so you could then, I'll have that Beatles record for a week. And 6 shillings and sixpence, which meant you get 3 for £1. And so, and as you say, it was that kind of visceral thing of it being, it was different, and it was rebellious, and even the Beatles were rebellious.
Of course.
And, but also, I think it was record labels, Decca, that blue label, and Pi, which the Kinks were on, lovely pink labels, and just everything about it. And then, much later, when, you got albums, and that whole experience of opening an album and pulling a fresh disc out, you know, and the smell of it, and all the liner notes, and so I mean, I had the bug when I was quite young, and you know, tried to play, but I think lack of talent and you know, coordination soon put a stop to that.
Right. Okay. Well, let's talk about where we get into your career. I mean, so obviously we're going to be talking about Queen quite a lot, but your first start actually didn't come straight away with Queen. It was with David Bowie and Mott the Hoople. Is that right? So tell us about how you kind of got into that.
Yeah. I mean, I came down to London. I was 18, and my cousin had worked for bands, and I came from the area where Traffic came from and Mott the Hoople came from, Herefordshire, Worcestershire. And Traffic used to rehearse in the local village hall, you know. I mean, it was incredible. And I think a farmer complained that his cows wouldn't give milk afterwards because they were so loud or whatever. But and I mean, Traffic were, you know, I mean, they were quite big then. I think the Hole in My Shoe was out, but you just kind of remember all these things, and it was just sort of, oh, that's great. But now you realise how, you know, fucking marvellous it was to, you know, have Traffic in your village hall. And anyway, so I'd seen bands, and I knew the guys in Mott, and I came to London, and my cousin, he'd worked a bit for Mott, but he worked with other bands, and I was hanging out with him, and he was with the guy who was the sound engineer and head of the crew for another band, and a guy called Robin, and he said to me, you know a bit about guitars, don't you? Yeah, which I did. Right. He said, you know, and, you know, Marshall amplifiers. So I'm starting to wing it a bit. But yeah, well, I know about them. It's right, yeah. And you can drive. Oh, I can definitely drive. Okay, got a license, no problem there. Oh, well, do you fancy coming out on tour with us? Yeah, all right. And that was Ziggy Stardust. That was the Bowie tour, you know. Wow. And Robin was the sound engineer for Bowie. And funny enough, I got an email from him today, actually, with a Lou Reed track, because afterwards we did stuff with other bands. Yeah. And he'd recorded this show at the Rainbow, which was amazing, this Lou Reed show. So suddenly it's like, you know, I'm out on, you know, kind of doing a bit of everything, but then mainly I was looking after Mick Ronson. And, yeah, I mean, it was just fantastic. And
were those shows, because this is presumably the end of Ziggy Stardust? You saw the whole, you know, I mean, I've seen documentaries, I've seen footage, also I've listened to the live album many times.
Is that the one Robin recorded?
It would be, yes.
Because I know he sells it through his website.
Right, okay.
And it's from Hammersmith, the last show. Yeah. And he mixed it, and it comes straight out of the desk, so it's a great quality.
It's an amazing record.
Yeah,
it's an amazing record.
I mean, they were a really good band. You know?
Yep.
And Spiders.
Yeah, absolutely, they were. What was the atmosphere like? I mean, particularly that Hammersmith show, which, you know, I've seen footage from it, and girls crying, people screaming, and the kind of the absolute pinnacle of Bowie as this megastar kind of alien siren. I mean, it must have been insane to be around that.
I mean, it was just this amazing ride, really, but it was really hard work. I mean, you know, they did a lot of shows. I mean, it was, you know, at least 6 a week, if not 7 a week, and matinees. I mean, you know, do a show at 6 in the evening, and another one at, you know, kind of 9 o'clock or something. And, yeah, it was pretty crazy, but it was a job. It was still a job, you know. And, of course, you know, when you're 18, it's like, you know, you're invincible, you're on top of the world, and it was great. And, yeah, all that sort of, as you say, screaming girls and all that. And David had security. He had a black guy called Stewie, who was great fun, Stewie George, and he was David's security guy. But, you know, often the crew would have to, you know, stop people getting on stage or whatever. But the main thing was that they didn't pinch any equipment, or they didn't break any equipment. It was more of that, really. But it kind of just took it all in your stride. And then the last show at Hammersmith, when I didn't know that Bowie was going to retire. He told Mick Ronson, and I know Robin the sound guy knew. I don't think anyone else knew. Maybe Susie did. Susie was the wardrobe girl she was a hairdresser who gave David the Ziggy cut.
Yeah. And
she later married Mick Ronson. Maybe she knew, but the Spiders didn't know. And then he's like, that's it. That's the end of the tour, and it's the last one we'll ever do. Well, I suppose I better get another job then.
Well, yeah, exactly. I was going to say, what's the atmosphere like at a gig after something? Because as I said, from the footage that I've seen of it, it looks like from the outside of the Hammersmith Apollo, the whole world is suddenly looking at that building and people are losing their minds outside of it. But then I guess inside backstage, it's more of a, well, I have no idea. What was it like when you stepped on stage?
Well, basically, we loaded the gear out and that was it. And then it wasn't very long afterwards, and I think Robin might have even spoken to Tony DeFries, who was Bowie's manager, main man, and Robin bought all the equipment because David didn't own the equipment. It was owned by main man. It was owned by Tony DeFries, the PA, even a lot of the back line. Ronno owned his guitars, but a lot of the stuff, keyboards and things like that, Mellotron we had on tour, it was all owned by main man. So Robin bought it all, the sound guy bought it all, and then he formed a hire company called Ground Control, as in Ground Control to Major Tom.
Yeah.
And then very shortly afterwards, we started going out with other bands, hiring the PA out. And I think it was July that David quit, and then come November, we were doing a Mott the Hoople tour. We did tours with other bands as well who hired the PA, and then there was a sort of agreement that anything David or Ronno did, we would be available, So, you'd end up going to babysit for Bowie, or you'd end up, when he was doing Diamond Dogs, you get a call, David wants a double ring tambourine. Okay, so down to Olympic with a double ring tambourine or whatever. And then, he wants another 200 Gauloises or whatever it is. And so you were kind of on call. But by then I was actually working for Ground Control,
right.
Which was, the equipment hire company. And because of the connection with David and Mott, it was like, right, well, they can do the PA. And, and there were connections because my cousin, who was working for Ground Control, he knew Mott really well, and I sort of knew them. So it was in a very cold, miserable November, and down the bottom of North End Road in Fulham, there's a Waitrose, and in 1973, it was an old cinema. It was the ABC Regal, which had been bought by Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And they gutted the stalls and taken all the seats out. And then it was a rehearsal space for bands of the time. And Bowie rehearsed there. And Mott were rehearsing. And there was no heating. And so they covered the stalls with parachute silks, try and hold some heat in, these big gas heaters,
Mm-hmm.
And so Mott showed up for rehearsals. And Mott were, you say, a pretty visceral rock and roll band, There's no, no real airs or graces, but they'd sort of become a little bit glammy, around that period, even though it wasn't really in their nature, Mm. And Ariel Bender was in the band, and he brought a lot more excitement because Mick Rolfes had left to form Bad Company with Paul Rodgers. And Ariel Bender, Luther Grosvenor, who'd been in Spooky Tooth. He was a great guitar player, but he brought a lot more energy to them. Anyway, we're rehearsing, and it's really cold, and everybody is, got their big coats on and scarves and all that. And then we're told the support band's coming in to run through their bits. Okay. And it was strange because Mott were on CBS, and normally support bands came from the same label or the same management or whatever. Mm-hmm. And the band that came in were on EMI. I thought, oh, it's strange. So yeah, this band's coming in, and they're called Queen. Oh, okay. So Queen come in, and they're all dressed in their satins and frocks and Zandra robes, and and Fred's got his makeup on, and it's like, the fuck is this, And they get up on stage, and they really go for it. And he's prancing around, as he continued to do with his, little wand of a mic stand, and they're really going for it. And people were kind of, it's like, well, who do you think you are? You're the support band.
How many people were in the room at that time when they were doing this, would you say?
Well, there would have been the crew, which wasn't many. Who knows? There might have been some of Mott's management. It was a big, room. It was a big space. If you're thinking, an old cinema with the stage and the what was, the kind of, not the proscenium, but the way that the stalls are raked, which was all clear. And ELP kept all their gear there, and they had offices upstairs. And again, Jethro Tull had their office upstairs. So, suddenly you'd see other people kind of just popping down and hanging out. I think the consensus was, everyone thought, well, they'll never make it. They got their first album out. It's like, nah, you can't have a lead singer called Fred. It's never going to work. And so they came out on the tour, and they got, I think, a reasonable reception, because support bands, it's a thankless task,
Really is, yeah.
When you're opening for a big band, most people don't even listen to them, And so, yeah, it's a hard gig. But I think they were building a little bit of a following, And so they went down well and really gave it their all. But from day one, they were really pushy. They were pushy to get longer. They were pushy to have more space on stage. Mm-hmm. They were pushy that they wanted more lights. And that never stopped ever, them having that kind of drive. And it came mainly from Fred. They were all very, very focused. But it came really from him, and it was like, we are going to be the biggest band in the world, Laughed our heads off.
So how did that relationship between yourself and Queen blossom into, from you being a guy who's doing a job in a sort of a company from that you've basically kind of fallen into a bit through, a bit of know-how and, being in the right place at the right time, to then seeing this band and then ending up working with them in the manner you did? Like, talk me through how that relationship started.
Yeah, as I say, we met them in, what is now Waitrose, and people say, oh, how was it when you first met Fred? And I can't actually remember actually meeting him, and I don't think you ever met Fred, you encountered him.
Right.
Someone you encountered. And I've worked out that it's probably by the frozen broccoli aisle or something like that,
There should be a plaque there.
In Waitrose. He would have preferred it to be by the fine wines and champagnes, dear, something like that. But after that tour, I'm trying to remember how it went. Mick Ronson went out and on a solo thing, so I spent some time in the studio with him. And then Ronno did a solo tour and around England, which was good. And then he was going to do some more stuff. But then I think he went back in the studio. And then we did a Lou Reed tour because, again, there was a connection with Lou Reed and Bowie, and Mick Ronson he'd pretty much produced and played on most of Transformer, piano stuff and the arrangements. So it's all Mick Ronson.
Yeah.
And some of the guitar work, he's so undervalued. Ronno, unbelievably undervalued. And, that I would say probably the nicest guy ever in the music business for me.
Right. Okay.
I mean, just, he was just, just such a nice guy and easy to work with, and, never any tantrums, and even, stuff went wrong, particularly with all the fans and stuff getting on the stage and breaking his pedal boards and trying to fix them in the middle of the show, and breaking, tuners off his guitar, and just, stuff like that. And,
right.
And
he took all that in good grace.
Kind of, in good grace. And I think we got to one point on the tour, he only had one half-decent guitar left, one Les Paul, and he would hold it up at the end of White Light, White Heat, which was the encore. And I could see it, and I remember it now. It was in the Caird Hall in Dundee. And he's holding it up. Les Paul's heavy with one hand, and letting it feed back. And it's slowly going. And I run across the stage and dive, try and get it, but I don't get it. And he drops it. Anyway, so after the show, I look at it and there's a little crack in the neck. So I said, Mick, it's a crack in the neck. Oh, don't worry, Peter. Just put a bit of gaffer tape on it. I'll tune as I go along. And he broke a string, and we only had this one guitar. So I gave him the spare string, probably an E string, and he was tuning it and playing and talking to the audience at the same time. I mean, just remarkable, Yeah. I mean, such a talent. So we did, a lot of stuff with Ronno, and then with Lou Reed, and then Eno and Roxy, and when Eno went solo, and all kinds of people, and then Mott again. And by that time, Ariel Bender had been sacked from Mott, and Mick Ronson was in Mott the Hoople.
Yeah.
So, and then that didn't last long, and I actually got offered a job with Queen before I joined them, but I think it was to do drums, and I wasn't a drum roadie, and not for me, like big Meccano sets, I just never. And then I think the guitar job was on offer, but then Brian's roadie came back or whatever, and so anyway, I didn't take it. But then I think after they finished that tour, and Mott and all their different versions, the Mott that was left with Pete and Buffin and Morgan Fisher, I think they'd finally gone or whatever. And Queen wanted a new road crew, and they said, well, we'd like to have, the Mott road crew, because two other guys were much older than me. I was 18 and they were like about 24, 25, and they'd, been on the road a long time. And I was maybe just 20 then, I think. And so it was like, okay, yeah. So the drum roadie would look after Roger, and Richie, who did the guitars, would look after Brian, and they said, and you can look after Fred and John on stage right. Yeah, okay, fine. And that was when they were doing Night of the Opera. So I came in, we all came in, when they were recording that. So we were around when they were doing bits down in Rockfield and then all over London. And so that's when it started, really.
And that's a very, very interesting time to be joining this band, isn't it? I mean, that is the point where they go from, I think, as you said earlier, this band who people thought were never going to make it, to suddenly, I mean, did you see that when you hooked back up with them? Did you see, well, this is a different band to the band that I remember sort of opening up from Mott the Hoople, or did they always have that kind of aura about them?
Well, they just they were going through a lot of changes. I mean, they'd just signed with John Reid, who was Elton's manager.
Yeah.
And I knew John Reid from, I'd done some work with Kevin Ayres, and he'd managed Kevin Ayres and a couple of other sort of smaller people. So I knew the guy who I think was going to be the kind of coordinator, the personal. So I knew him. So, I was quite comfortable with all that. But basically, it was a job, and it was going to be 40 quid a week, every week.
Yeah.
40 quid, I mean, it was like, wow, this is all right. And it really was just a job. And it's like, well, okay, we sort of know them, but we don't. And they've had a bit of success, but you know, this is it. I mean, it's going to be 40 quid a week and who knows where it'll go. And that was the kind of attitude you had. And it's like, well, if it don't work out, you know, I'll try and get a job with Zeppelin or something.
Right,
or Black Sabbath or whoever, you know, whoever wants a roadie. But yeah, I think people say about Bo Rap, and we didn't know what it was because you just heard bits and pieces, segments of it. And when you heard the opera bit, we all thought it was going to be an introduction, tape for the show, like an intro thing before the band came on stage. I didn't think it was a song. And then, then you heard the whole thing and it was like, oh, blimey. God. Well, at least I'm on 40 quid a week till Christmas, you know. So.
Did you think that, because obviously, famously, record label executives were like, what is this? You can't, you know what I mean? And was that a kind of, until it broke, was there a bit of sort of, from people outside of the band, did you feel that worry, that kind of not really understanding what it was that they were trying to do at that point?
Well, I don't think as a crew we didn't, because, we were there and it was, a lot of changes going on, and we were at Elstree Film Studios and we're on Paul McCartney's stage rehearsing, and we were putting a new show together and getting all their gear sorted out, getting a new light show up, and they were still recording, they were still mixing, doing overdubs, and the work ethic was phenomenal. I mean, they'd be working, all day in the studio, and then they come up to Elstree and work at night and through the night, and then sometimes go back to the studio just to get everything done, And that was the one thing that really sort of got me was, these guys are prepared to, work their asses off, and it's got to be right. And so suddenly, from them being the support band, they were now my bosses, and Fred was my boss. So, there was quite a bit of deference, that, and he was demanding. I mean, he always was, and that never stopped. But because he was demanding and because he expected everybody to be at a certain level, he kind of raised your game as well. So everyone else around him, he kind of lifted you up. The whole band did, but particularly Fred, And so you knew you had to be, on your best.
Yeah.
And at your sharpest and all that. So you could see that they'd come quite a way. I think they will admit they learnt a lot on that Mott tour and learnt, not that Mott were a show band in the way that Queen were, but, the way Ian Hunter could work the audience and, some of the stage theatricals and things. But certainly they picked up from that and learnt from that. But it was more that they were now really driven. And when you reflect on it, it was a seminal time because, it was Night of the Opera, it was Bo Rap, change of management, they still got no money. Fred was living in a glorified bedsit in Holland Road with Mary,
Yeah.
And, Roger was in a bedsit in Barnes, and so they had no money, And I think Mary supported Fred in the early days. She had a job, and so they were still waiting, and that's why they got out of the deal at Trident and went with John Reid and all that. And so it was a seminal time and an important time because it was their fourth album, and they hadn't really had any success. Killer Queen was a hit, but Sheer Heart Attack had done well, but it wasn't real success. And I think if Night of the Opera hadn't been a success, EMI could have dropped them. These days, you'd never get a 4-album deal, No. You're lucky to get a 4-minute fucking single, It's like, it's a totally different world. And it cost, I think it was the most expensive album ever made at that point. It was just ridiculous. But John Reid believed in him, and obviously Kenny Everett did, because he played the single when no one else would, and everyone else wanted to edit it.
And I mean, that's the thing for you as well, as when you think about that, you know, how close they came with that amount of money being spent. And if it hadn't have been a hit, I think a lot of the times when people think of the dips in bands' careers, they go, oh, you know, they're multi-millionaires, they got up to be rock stars and then they didn't sell a few albums and fine, they'll be okay. But that's your £40 a week. That's your living wage. I mean, how precarious does that feel when you're part of a machine like Queen? And basically, you know, you kind of are the whim of what they want to do artistically is ultimately going to affect the kind of venues they play, the kind of budgets they play, what kind of show they put on. How much did that play on your mind?
It didn't really play at all. I mean, say it was just on that tour. It was just a job. But as the tour went on, and again, we would play in the matinees. We'd do 2 shows a day.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was a big show, a long show, an exhausting show for them. And you know, we'd do like a 6 o'clock, and then you know a 9 o'clock or something, or 5:30 and 8 or something. I mean, so we were working, you know, our asses off. But I think as soon as the tour got rolling and you know the album was going up, Bo Rap got to number 1, and by the end of the tour, you felt, yeah, we're really onto something here. This is something really special. And we'd already done several Hammersmith Odeons, and I actually think we even did matinees there too, or one matinee, because, you know, selling out and what have you. And then they did the Christmas show at Hammersmith after the tour finished in Glasgow. And then we came back, and a few days later, they did a live Old Grey Whistle test from Hammersmith Odeon. And I think that really kind of changed the game for them, because you didn't see that much of bands on TV. You had Top of the Pops and you had the Whistle test and that. But to have a kind of prime time concert on Christmas Eve was live, you know, it was a really big thing. And I just remember it being business as usual, really. And people have said, oh, they must have been really nervous or whatever. And it was like, well, I never picked up on it. They were always professional. And by then, you know, we'd got into the tour and it was really running well. Everyone knew it, you know, the back of your hand. But I think that show really kind of took them up there. And yeah, and you know, it was like, well, you've got to work Christmas Eve, and you know, you're not going to see your family, and this is that. And don't think we got paid any extra or anything,
right.
But it was just, that was just the way it was, you know. I mean, there was no health and safety, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, there was no HR department. I mean, you know, no mobile phones, no computers. You just got on with it. And yeah, I mean, it was like, well, it was just a different era. And I'm not saying it was better or it was worse. It was just different, you know. I mean, political correctness didn't exist back then, or, as I say, health and safety. So you just did what you had to do to make it work.
Yeah.
And then after Christmas, we went to the States and then Japan and Australia. And, yeah, you then felt, yeah, this is it. And at the end of the tour, we were retained. I was retained, and I think one of the other guys. And then after another period, they took on, I think, the drum guy full time. But and then it was straight into doing the next album, Day at the Races. I mean, the work never ever stopped until 1983. It was album, tour, video. You know, they just never eased up. The work ethic was phenomenal.
So talk me through when it hit big and Queen have become this household name, this number one band, you know, this incredible, phenomenal success. How did your life change? How did your job change? And what did a normal, if there is such a thing as a quote-unquote normal day at the office for you, what would that look like around that period?
Well, you're right. There never was a normal day at the office. I mean, you had days at the office on tour. You had days at the office in the studio, and days at the office when You know, Brian wanted his garden rubbish taken away, and Fred wanted his hi-fi fixed, or
Right.
whatever. You know, so it just was. You were there, beck and call, 24 hours. As I said, the Night of the Opera thing, you really felt, this is big. And then they were the darlings of the press. And, of course, the English press, they like to build you up, but don't let you stay there too long, you know. Don't want you to be too successful.
Yeah,
so
we'll get to that for sure, I'm sure.
We'll knock you down. And but I think when they were really big was like 80, 81, and they always wanted to be the biggest band in the world. That was their thing. And the benchmark was Zeppelin, because in America, Zeppelin could do whatever they wanted. You know, they can just say, right, we'll play, you know, 10 Madison Square Gardens, and they could have done it if they wanted to. And every booking agent would tell you that the band sell out, you know, in the late 70s, up until, 80 when Bonzo died, it was Zeppelin. They could do whatever they wanted. And obviously Queen were influenced to a degree. The early stuff, I'd say, had a Zeppelin-y feel.
Yeah.
Probably better harmonies, but it had that heaviness about it. And certainly they were the people they looked up to in terms of, you know, being that big. But it was 1980 when they had the Game album, and a Crazy Little Thing Called Love was number one in America. And then they had another one, Bites the Dust, was number one in America.
Yeah.
The album was number one in America. It was huge all over the world. And then we'd gone to South America, been the first band to play arenas, outdoor stadiums in South America. And then you felt, yeah, this is it. They are, you know, the biggest band for that fleeting period in the world.
Yeah. You've already kind of mentioned that Freddie was a man who you experienced rather than meet. Trying to work and actually do a job and, you know, to put on what I imagine was quite a you know, an undertaking as a show, and to try and make sure that those wheels are greased and that everything runs smoothly while you've got a band who allegedly are keen to enjoy themselves to the fullest. How difficult was it to balance that? How much did you get to enjoy yourself? And I guess really probably what a lot of people are screaming at the moment is how much of that is true?
Well, like all stories over time, they get exaggerated and expounded and what have you. But I mean, it's I mean, as a roadie, you know, we had a different task. I mean, I often get asked. I say I work for Queen. You know, I worked for Queen for 11 years.
Yeah.
Oh, great! Did you ever meet them? I'm like, yeah,
Wow.
well, you know, and so, well, what did you do? You know, what's a roadie? And I said, well, you know, you kind of do all the, I mean, back then, now, roadies wear, you know, white linen gloves and have laptops and don't get their hands dirty and call themselves techs or technicians. But back then, you did all the dirty work, you know, I mean, the humping of the gear, loading the truck, all that kind of stuff, plus all the technical things, you know. You had to know the equipment inside out. You had to know, you know, tuning guitars. I mean, just all of that stuff. Plus, you know, you were sort of on call, you know, to get Fred his towel or to, you know, light John's cigarettes or, you know, all these kind of personal things. So you're like a sort of technical valet, you know. And I always say that I was to Fred what Baldrick was to Blackadder, you know.
Right.
That's my kind of my duties. You know, I was the Admirable Crichton, but without the dress code. So, so yeah, we had a different role. But I would say for all the stories of the wretched excess, Queen were never ever a druggy band. I mean, not in the way that you could say Zeppelin were or the Stones were or, you know, Guns N' Roses or whatever. They were always very professional. And when I first worked for the band, the mention of drugs was absolutely taboo. I mean, this is Night of the Opera days,
Right.
absolutely taboo.
Okay.
And Fred was totally anti anything. I mean, back then, Roger smoked cigarettes, and that was it. I mean, they all liked to drink, but, you know, they were focused. And it was as the success came, the pressure came, that, yeah, the recreational pursuits came in. But never for Brian. Never, ever did anything.
Really?
Ever. I mean, he liked to drink, never smoked cigarettes, never did any drugs, ever.
Wow.
I mean, he's on a different planet as it is. I mean, so, you know, he doesn't need that. But, yeah, for the rest of the entourage and the band, yeah, things crept in. And it crept in as the success crept in. And really, you kind of look back and realise the pressure they were under. And, you know, you're in the biggest band in the world and you're, you know, expected to write another hit single, do another big album. And meanwhile, you know, for John, you've got 5 or 6 kids at home and all the pressures that go with it. And John ran the financial side of things with the accountant for the band, because by then they didn't have a manager.
Yeah.
They had a tour manager and a lawyer and an accountant and a crew of 3, and that was it. Everyone else was hired in. So it was a very tight-knit unit, but there was a lot of pressure on the band that you don't maybe realise until you look back on it. But yeah, the wild parties, all that, yeah, I mean, of course, they loved to have all that kind of fun. But yeah, there was never, you know, it never ever stopped the band going on stage, you know, as opposed to, I mean, the Stones back in the mid-70s, there was a guy, his only job was to get Keith Richards on stage. That's all he had to do. Because the Stones were terrible, 3-4 hours late, you know.
Yeah.
And he was an ex-military guy, and that was his job. And he would try a different tact every day to get Keith Richards on stage, whether he physically dragged him up there, he used psychology, he used everything. And that was his job.
Wow.
and
He earned his money then, I'm sure.
Yeah, and, you know, I mean, the Stones and the Faces were another band who enjoyed their recreationals and had all their amplifiers white so that they could put lines on the top and all that. And it's like, why is that? Well, the audience can't see it. No, Keith, but neither can you know. So anyway,
but it's got to be, I think, as much as the pressure to see some of the footage of Queen from 80, 81. I mean, you talk about going to South America and the kind of the gig in Rio de Janeiro. Just, you know, this insanely huge crowd. I've listened to the Nebworth live album as well, and the reaction from the crowd that they get, as I'm sure they did wherever they went. The adrenaline. I find it hard to believe that the human body is built to be able to take in that much adrenaline without, and then just have it cut off in like an hour and a half of what must feel like just an unbelievable thrill to then just walk off and you're just supposed to sit down, have a cup of tea and go to bed. Like, you just don't think you can.
That's it. I mean, a lot of, you know, as you say, that pressure and that adrenaline has to be released somehow. So it's released by, you know, getting off your face, by trashing hotel rooms, by, you know, the company of young ladies or whatever it may be. They were release valves, all of those things. Because, I mean, the band were a great live band. I mean, that was not their secret, but it was one of the keys, is they could really play. They were good musicians and they, you know, gave it their all. And when they were good, I mean, they were amazing. And when you're on stage and you can feel that energy, you can feel it directly, you know, and you're not hearing the mix about front, but you're hearing it's in such close quarters, you know. I mean, you know, Fred's almost spitting on me from the piano, you know, because he's singing so hard. And, and you get that. And vicariously, you know, you almost feel part of the band because you're doing all these cues and things to help the show and to get that precision. And it was quite magical. And I think 80, 81, I think they were phenomenal then. And that was also the time they changed from, in the 70s, from being a really great rock band. When you got into 80, 81 and Part of the Game and then Hot Space and other albums, they became a really great pop band. Albeit with, you know, good songs and still great live performances. But they did become more commercial. I mean, there's no question. But is that good or bad? I don't know. It's just the way they evolved. And they didn't purposely go that way. It's just, you know, the way they went creatively. And Fred always wanted to do something different, you know. I mean, you know, from Bo Rap to... We went into the rehearsals at Elstree when the Who owned most of Elstree Studios, and we had a big stage there to do rehearsals for News of the World. And Fred comes in and says, I've got this song about football. Oh, fucking hell, Fred, you know, I mean, what do you know about football? I've never seen you stand on the terraces at Stamford Bridge, you know, I mean, honestly. But he'd already got this whole thing of the unity and all that singing, you know, like the Cop used to sing at Anfield, and he could see that, and he could see how he could put it into a live show. And, you know, again, it was like, well, oh dear, hang on. Well, I'm on 45 quid a week by now, but it might not last much longer, you know. But he always had total belief in what he was doing. And, I mean, they all did, but he did particularly. But if it didn't work, it's fine. Leave it, move on. And I think he accepts that he made mistakes. I think they all do. Maybe Brian not so much, but musically or whatever. But he was just doing what he wanted to do, you know. But the pressure, definitely. And he'd come in to the studio or in the dressing room or whatever, he'd go, oh God, I just don't want to be Freddie Mercury today. And all that entails, and all that people expect, you know, of you to be Freddie Mercury. And you can see how it did take its tolls. And then, say, from being someone who was completely anti-drugs, you know, and never smoked, sort of by 1980, you know, Fred was really at it. I mean, he really was. But it never, ever affected his performance.
Well, I was going to ask you, actually. There's two things I was going to ask you. I'm going to ask the more pressing one first, which I think is something you just touched on there. When that kind of, the razzle-dazzle Freddie Mercury kind of slipped away and he did just sit, I mean, how often did you see that mask slip? And what sort of amount, I think people with such iconic entertainers, you see them and you feel like you know them. You know, to me, I watch interviews of Freddie Mercury. I've been listening to their music since I was this high. I feel like I know him, but I know that I don't.
No.
Do you know what I mean? I know in reality that I couldn't have
He
done.
was two very different people. I mean, he was the performer, this, you know, the front man, the stage man, all of that, and the flamboyant character. But he was actually very private. I mean, off stage. And, you know, yeah, he would go out when we were on tour, when we were in the studio and that. But I mean, when he was in London, he rarely used to go out. I mean, you know, he'd never go and see other bands. I mean, the rest of Queen did. They loved to go and see other bands. But Fred wouldn't. He'd go to the opera now and again, or he'd go to the ballet. But he was happy at home playing Scrabble, you know, and sitting there with his cats and having a cup of tea. So, I mean, we used to see, what you say, the mask slip. You'd see the real Fred kind of every day when you're recording, because he doesn't have to put on an act for anybody, you know. He's there, he hasn't shaved, you know, and he's picking his teeth after breakfast, and he's just another human being, you know. Well, actually, no, he's a bit more than just another human being,
Yeah.
quite a lot more. But, then you could just have normal conversations with him. Whereas when you're on tour, it was a different vibe. Or when there was an audience, or when his coterie was around him and he liked to play to the gallery, then he was different. But
Right.
when it was a tight-knit group of... When we lived in Munich for a long, long time, and it was Mac, the producer, and the band, me and the other two roadies, and I think there was a personal guy there sometimes, but that was really it. I mean, there was no minders or anything,
Yeah.
I mean, I used to drive John around, and the other roadies would drive Brian and Roger, and then I think Fred had a driver locally, and that was it. It wasn't this huge entourage that people imagine, and and it was jeans and t-shirts, and kind of just be normal, and so you saw both sides of it, and you understood why, when they were on tour and when situations were different, that the atmosphere was different, and the connection between you and the band would be different.
I was also going to ask you, as a man who's seen your fair share of Queen shows, and their reputation, like you mentioned earlier, as a live band is, pretty much unparalleled, I would say. I think they're pretty much considered the great live band of all time. Did they ever have an off night? Was there ever a night where it wasn't quite clicking?
Occasionally. I mean, just for various reasons. If Fred's voice wasn't up to it or whatever, or if, Roger had been hammering it a little bit and towards the end of the show he was flagging or whatever. But
Yeah.
I never saw them give a bad show. I mean, there was once Fred came on stage drunk in New Zealand, and compounded by the fact that they had to walk, it was an outdoor show, walk a long way from the dressing room to the stage. And when they got there, the wardrobe guy, who was an alcoholic, a lovely guy, but I mean, he did like a drink, and he put Fred's trousers on back to front. So,
Really?
and Fred hadn't noticed, so he had to go back and change his
Right.
trousers. Anyway, and yeah, but it still wasn't a bad show, but he was just kind of fooling around a little bit. But he still gave it everything. But no, they were consummate professionals. And as I say, certainly in terms of, being out of it on blow or anything, never on stage, never ever.
So what was the atmosphere if they had one of those nights that was, like, say, not a bad show but not to the standards that they had set? What would the atmosphere in the camp be like after that? Was there ever any tension?
Yeah, I mean, they'd go back and Fred would throw things and trash the dressing room and order that people were fired or whatever, and sack
Do you ever get the finger pointed at you?
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, for all kinds of things, I mean, just because the front row were ugly, I'd be blamed. I mean, Fred.
Wow.
He had the tour manager got called in, and I don't know. Usually, it was when Fred's love life wasn't going very well, or in some, I don't know, remote place in Idaho or God knows where in America. So, did you see the front row of the audience? Did you see them? Well, no, Fred. They're all ugly, all fucking ugly. I don't want that at a Queen show. Sort it out. Yeah, okay, all right. And of course, next day it's all forgotten. But I mean, tough one. What are you going to do? Go to the promoter and say, well, you're going to have casting sessions before you release the premium seats.
Yeah.
And so you get all that kind of stuff. And he'd lose it. But then, it was usually quickly forgotten because, I mean, things did go wrong. I mean, his microphone would cut out because, I mean, he gave it a hell of a lot of punishment. But I had spares all set up, with the stick on, the wand on, everything. He'd throw it down, I'd flick a switch, give him the other one, take the other one. And so it was all, it was all very smooth. But he hated it. He hated anything that went wrong,
Right.
A generator packs up and half the lights go out. And, so he wanted it right all the time. He was, consummate professional. Brian's out of tune didn't go down well, and I'd get messages, tell that fucker, he's not in tune. Which one's that, Fred? You know who it is. And tell the other fucker he can't keep the beat up. Yeah, all right, okay. How do I say good evening in Belgium? What am I supposed to do?
Couldn't Google it back then, could you?
Yeah, no.
These days
Well, he used to write things on his hand in marker pen, phrases like if we were somewhere, and things like that. Right. And of course, he's sweating and all this gets rubbed off.
Yeah.
So tell me, what is it? I don't know, do I? Not a infrared linguist, Fred.
No.
Oh, fuck 'em. I'll talk in English. So you get things like that. And then very, very occasionally, he would have a blank. And he would forget the introduction to a song or something. And he'd say, what key is this in? What key is this in? I'm not a musician, I don't know. E flat, because a lot of his songs are in E flat. Oh, yeah, okay, right. Okay. Right.
Wow.
But it was very rare, but occasionally you just get this thing. So I mean, he was human, but
Yeah.
he didn't want to be human. He wanted to be superhuman.
Of course. Which brings us to a day when I think we're talking about things clicking and it all coming right and a man being superhuman. I mean, it's been spoken about so many times. I think the amount of words that have been written about it, the words that have been spoken about it, probably don't even bear thinking about. But I can't let you go without talking about Live Aid and just what that day was like. I mean, everybody's seen it. I think that's the fact that you can see it. It's undeniable. I mean, still to this day, you watch it, you get goosebumps. It's just phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of things from, if you like, my career back then, in hindsight, you look back and think, wow, I was part of that. I mean, by the time I was 25, I was head of the crew for the biggest band in the world. I'm chartering jumbo jets, I'm bribing people, I've been shot at, I've had knives pulled at me, and now, not in 2019, I'm in my early to mid 60s. And I mean, I shit myself if I haven't paid my TV licence, It's like, oh God, I haven't touched my Oyster card in properly. And you look back and think, then I just took all that in my stride. And I would say that Fred was particularly important in implementing that belief. He raised his game and everyone else raised their game. So when I left the band and went into photography and, became a professional photographer and did very well for a long time, I would say that a lot of that was down to the ethos of the band and Fred's approach to everything of you do it and you do it right. Quality and style, dear. Do it with quality and style.
Yeah.
And that was always his thing. And as to Live Aid, yeah, we all know what happened, but they also weren't going to do it. I mean, I think their thing was, well, we're not, we don't do charity gigs. We're not political. And they weren't a political band at all. They just wanted to sell records and play to as many people as possible. I mean, they love playing, they love recording, and they love being successful. Nothing wrong with that. But it took, I can't remember the exact thing. I think Bob Geldof ambushed Fred in a restaurant in the Fulham Road, and
Right.
I've got to fucking do this. It's made for you, Oh no, dear, you and your Ultravox, is it, or something? I think it's the Boomtown Ultravoxes or whatever. You could never get these bands' names right.
Yeah.
Oh, you'll do very well. Don't worry about us. We're too old, darling. And all that. Anyway, when they did agree to do it, it was business as usual, and our tour manager came over from LA, our sound engineer was American, our monitor engineer was American, and they came over and we rehearsed at the Shaw Theatre in Euston Road, and it was business as usual. And I went out and bought these clocks, these big white plastic clocks, put them in the front of the stage, and then set them at 12 o'clock or something, and they started running through versions of the set, and so you'd see where your 18, I think it was 18 minutes or something, officially, was. And the set came together really quickly. And I think everyone was surprised because you thought with all the stuff they've got, And there were always issues about whose tracks would go on the album, etc., whose track was going to be the single. All those kind of, every band has that, who gets the publishing. And yet it came together really quickly. And I suppose the surprising thing is that of all the songs they played at Live Aid, there isn't one John Deacon song. And yet he wrote their biggest ever selling single.
Yeah,
Another One Bites the Dust.
Yeah.
So, but John went with the flow, John kind of, okay.
I mean, I just, obviously it's been said so many times, but I think the beauty of that set, and you say about it coming together quickly, 18 minutes you get Bohemian Rhapsody, We Are the Champions, We Will Rock You, Hammer to Fall, Crazy Little Thing Called Love,
Radio Gaga.
Yeah, I nearly forgot Ray, which is almost in 18 minutes. And you watch other footage of other bands who, fine at Live Aid that day, and they come out and they play their songs. But Queen, it's an attack. That set is nitroglycerine fueled, non-stop, pow, 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 pow. There is not a single second of fat in that. Even, the Bowie set that he did that day is incredible. But even the Bowie set, in between the songs for a second, you get him going, oh, thanks guys and stuff. Freddie, apart from the it just is bang, in you go, and you are here, and it is, that is a lesson to any band playing a festival. Yeah. To just get on and smash people, because they're unbelievable.
Well, they gave people what they wanted. That was the thing is, they knew they'd be going on without a sound check. Everyone, none of the bands, had sound checks. You were going on and you had no sound check, you had no light show, no pyro, whatever. So you've got to go out there and you've got to give the people what they want, I'm going to give them the hits. And Queen had an advantage in that they played big stadiums in South America and other places. So Fred knew how to work audiences, was it July, wasn't it? July 13th. So, 6 months before, they played Rock in Rio to 300,000 people. And done 2 shows there. So the band, and particularly Fred, knew how to do that. And the other advantage they had was that the sound system at Wembley was Clare Brothers Audio, American company, and it was our sound company that we used. And our sound engineer worked for them, but he always did Queen. And on the day, the People's Republic of Brent had their, sound officer come down and, say, right, and it wasn't the People's Republic of Brent, it was more like David Brent, we can't have this and we can't have that. And you've got to keep the noise down because there are some roosting partridges over near Kingsbury and they might be disturbed and all this bollocks, So limiters were set. But basically, Tripp, who was our sound engineer, when Queen came on, he turned the limiters off. So Queen were louder.
Right, okay.
I've heard it say, oh, they cheated. Because, it's a common fact that a lot of people know it. Say they cheated. They fucking cheated just because they were louder, They were the best band on the day. And they did it. And when you analyse the set, it's very, very clever. And I don't think they realised actually how clever it was. They certainly didn't plan it to be like that. It's difficult to say this. They wanted to give the hits, and obviously they would, have the energy and stuff. But you would expect Queen to come out and, go into Tie Your Mother Down or Now I'm Here, or something really heavy. And they just came out, waved to the audience, because Mal Smith and Griff Rhys-Jones had introduced them, dressed as coppers. Yeah. And
Her Majesty Queen.
Exactly, and all of this. And then Fred sits down at the piano. So suddenly the mood has gone down, and you would think they're going to lose the momentum. But of course, as soon as he starts playing Bo Rap, everybody knows it. But he doesn't do the whole thing. He just plays up to where, the opera bit would come in. And then they went into, I think that was Radio Gaga.
It was, yeah.
And of course, you got Radio Gaga, you got all the hand claps, and Then it was Crazy Little Thing Called Love. Fred's got the guitar, can do Guitar Hero and all that. And they just gave them that kind of mix, that medley. That was a big word. They used to like using the word medley. And there was, in the show, the live show, there was always a piano medley, which was little bits of songs based around piano songs, but they'd only do part of them, and then Fred would run off and sing part and come back again. But even though they were the complete songs, it was still a bit of a medley, you know. And they picked up on the energy, and I could feel it, and I'm sure everyone on the stage could feel it, that, wow, this is something special. They're really, you know, going down well.
It felt like they were going doubled. I mean, you listen to Hammer to Fall compared to its recorded version. Yeah. It's like twice the pace almost. It's like,
but every live band.
Yeah.
Every live band plays faster.
But particularly on like I say, on that set, it feels like a race to the end. And what was the atmosphere? I mean, were they up for it in that respect? Because it feels, I watch that and I go, they're treating this like a battle of the bands.
Yeah, I mean, they were certainly up for it. And were they nervous? Of course they were nervous, because, you know, all your peers are there, you know. Yeah. I mean, but they didn't need to prove anything to anybody. But I think as soon as they got to the stage and they felt the love of the audience or whatever, and they got that energy, that just drove them on. And I think they went on at a good time. They went on, I think it's about 6:20. It had been a really hot day. So the sun was starting to go down. It was cooling down a bit. People had been in there a long time, and they were getting pretty tired.
And they'd had to watch Spandau Ballet as well.
And they'd had to watch Spandau Ballet. They'd had to listen to Sade and people who, great artists, but they're not stadium people. The Style Council, you know.
Nick Kershaw.
Yeah, no comment. Anyway, but Quo had opened it brilliantly. We're rocking all over the world. But I think, you know, like an athlete needs a second wind, and I think the audience needed it, and Queen gave it to them. And and it was great, because I think, I'm trying to remember who was on before, whether it was it Dire Straits, The Who or Dire Straits, I can't quite remember. But I do remember watching The Who, and the front of the stage, there were these three lights, like traffic lights. It was red, amber and green. And green was on, you know, you're on, you're okay.
Yeah.
Amber was like, now, you know, you better start to think about wrapping up, because you're 18 minutes or whatever coming. And then it went to red, and it's like, now, come on, off lads, or flashing red. If you don't get off soon, you know, we're going to pull the plug. And I remember watching The Who, and I think they were probably doing Won't Get Fooled Again. And Bob Geldof was by the side of me. And I know he'd had painkiller injections that day or something, got a bad back. And he's doing Pete Townsend leaps in the air, you know, I mean, just going for it. And the energy from The Who was great. And Roger Daltrey, and, you know, someone points out about these little lights on there. So Daltrey goes and kicks the fucking things to pieces, you know, just smashes them. Just as you'd expect The Who to do.
Yeah.
And I mean, I thought they were good. I think I can't remember if they were on after us, but I remember watching them, so I must have packed the gear away, because it was a circular stage cut into 3 bits of pie. So you had a band on, a band setting up, and a band breaking down. Yeah. And it worked really, really well. But it was stressful, because you only had so long. I mean, as the band take the stage, I'm still tuning John's bass. And then when he comes back, I've just finished it and I give it to him.
So you can see it on the BBC footage, which people can watch on YouTube. You're on that, I presume.
I'm on that a lot, yeah. You see me giving Fred his guitar, giving him his mic. He comes to the piano, I go to give him his Telecaster, and then he wants a drink, so I go back and I give it to him. So, yeah, I'm on that.
Right.
Looking a lot younger, a lot slimmer, with hair and fashionable cut-off denims, as were fashionable in 1985.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, looking back, it was probably one of the, I'd say, greatest days of my life. But on the day, it was still another job. But yeah, I mean, they smashed it. And as they came off stage, I think it was Elton was backstage, and he said to him, "You fuckers, you've stolen the show." You know? And I think everyone accepts that they did, because they were professional, they knew what to do, but they were a great band. They were a great three-piece band with a singer, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, they could play, and that was the key. And I don't think people realise, well, certainly what a great musician John was. I think he's highly underrated. I mean, as a bass player, it's often the notes you don't play that are as important as the notes you do. You know,
Yeah.
you can be all the fancy Chris Squire type players, which are great, and other bass players. But I know he was very well respected in the industry by other musicians. And Fred had a great bond with John, which people don't understand. And he drew his songwriting out of him. I mean, because John didn't sing, so Freddie would sing all his songs. And when he was writing, Fred could see, you know, the potential. I mean, he did it with the others. He did it with Roger a lot as well. And not so much with Brian, but, you know, guitar players and singers are always at loggerheads in any band. But with John, he really drew it out of him and got great songs. And but yeah, he was the best rhythm guitar player in the band. I mean, just, you know, throwing stuff on a Telecaster or whatever. I mean, he was great. I mean, but he chose to retire. And
Telling that I think that
people should just, you know, accept that, because you hear stupid stories of, you know, he should keep going. And why should he keep going?
No,
I mean,
that's
when Freddie died. I mean, he just said, "That's it. Well, there's no more Queen, is there?" Clearly, I mean, you know,
I've got a huge amount of respect for John Deacon, but you know, the decision. I mean, you left Queen on the kind of Magic tour. Was your last?
Yeah,
tour?
I mean, I'd actually left officially before then, and to start my photography career, and I wasn't going to do the Magic tour, because I just thought, no, you know, I got to try and leave this behind, and I got a studio, and basically Fred psychologically arm twisted me and whatever to do it, and I thought, okay, all right. And, you know, I mean, we were very close. I mean, you know, he could be a difficult old sod. There's no question about it. But, you know, there was a lot of respect, and we were very close, and he trusted me. And it's nice. I mean, I still very occasionally see Mary, his girlfriend, who, you know, he left everything to.
Yeah.
And, you know, she speaks very fondly of, you know, the bond that Freddie and I had, which is very nice and, you know, to be thought of, because he would rarely ever give anybody praise, you know, because it's like if you give people praise, they get carried away with it. You've got to keep them on their toes, you know. But, yeah, and I did it, and that was the final tour, and so I'm glad that I did the final tour. But, yeah, it was a different experience to earlier tours.
Okay. And sort of post-leaving, I mean, obviously, Freddie's still very much missed by everyone who's a fan to this day, unless it's too kind of difficult a thing for you to talk about. You know, do you remember the last time you saw him? And
yeah, I do. I mean, it was about a year, I think, before he died, and it was the 20th anniversary of the band, and it was at the Groucho Club in Soho, and they were having some party, and I was there with my girlfriend, and there was a little private room upstairs for kind of the inner circle or whatever, I think. And I was up there, and I was with my girlfriend and John Deacon and his wife, who sat at a table, and Fred was over in the corner with some other people. Anyway, and he looked different, and he got a suit on, which, you know, wasn't really his style, but he looked really good. But his moustache had gone then and all that, and obviously he was much thinner. And anyway, he caught my eye, and he got up from the table and came over and gave me a hug. Oh, great, lovely to see you. Thanks for coming. Oh, great. Thanks, Fred. And that was it, you know, and last time I saw him. And, yeah, probably didn't expect it to be the last time. But, yeah, no, I mean, he is. I miss him. But, you know, I was lucky to have had that relationship with him and all those great times with him, you know, even though he could be a so difficult old bugger at times. And,
yeah, I'm sure. But, we should talk about the movie and the success. And I'm interested to get your take on Bohemian Rhapsody.
The film, the movie. I would say it is, it's entertainment. It's Hollywood entertainment. And that's really what it is. It took, I think, 12 to 15 years to make, with God knows how many script writers, lost count of the directors, actors, leading men. You know, it's been a lot. It took a long time to get there, and I think it shows. I think they've tried to tick every box. You know, we'll start off with, you know, Freddie is an immigrant, and let's just have a little bit of 1970s racism. We've ticked that box. And then I think they've tried to do too much. And I just think it's Hollywood entertainment. It bears no relevance to the truth, really. The detail is laughable, I think, absolutely laughable. I mean, even people who know very little about Queen know that Fred didn't have a moustache when they were recording We Will Rock You, you know. I mean, that didn't grow that till 3 years later. And I mean, you're talking Hollywood movies and you're talking so-called experts. But interestingly, they never asked anyone who had anything sort of real to do with the band to be involved. I mean, it's extraordinary. But, yeah, I think it lumbered along and it got to the point where it was like, well, a lot of money's been spent on this. We've got to get it out. And the secret, I think, to its success, and I have no doubt that the band and the producers and everyone connected with it are astonished of how successful it is. I mean, it's done over $1 billion.
Yeah.
Which is just phenomenal.
Maddening.
I mean, it's just, but it's the music. It is the music. And interestingly, I went to see it the day it came out, and then in the late afternoon, and then I had to go to a studio on the South Bank to do a live interview that evening for Australian television. And they wanted to know, I've done various interviews for Aussie TV about what I thought about it. So that was quite interesting. So fresh from seeing it, you know, and then going to give an interview. And as I say, the music carries it. I mean, the sound quality is really good. I mean, and it comes over. It comes over in the cinema. But I think that the script is dreadful. I think the dialogue is wooden. It's just, well, it bears no relevance to, you know, really what happened. But, you know, I'm sympathetic because I understand what filmmakers have to do. But it could have been so much better. It could have been infinitely better.
Yes.
In my opinion. I mean, I'm not sure if John speaks in the film, actually.
I think he says a couple of things.
And then there's some quite cruel thing at the end. This thing where allegedly Freddie is thrown out of the band. You know, I mean, they're all complete bollocks, you know, and then has to ask the band if he can come back and join them for Live Aid. I mean, all this rubbish. I mean, maybe it makes drama, but I mean, there's enough drama in Queen's career to make it a great movie.
It felt to me, I mean, I kind of started by going, well, it just goes to show how much people like Queen. And I interviewed, not to name drop, but I interviewed Duff McKagan of Guns N' Roses. And he said, I could have sat there and enjoyed it with my eyes closed because I love the music of Queen so much.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite right of what you said. I mean, obviously, people love Queen, and I think people haven't been able to see through its faults because they just are so desperate to like it. Yeah. I went in desperate to like it, and I kind of walked out. My thing that I'd said to a lot of people what it lacked more than anything. I mean, it kind of felt like a Queen set piece, greatest hits montage. Do you know what I mean? Oh, and this was the bit where we did the bass line for Another One Bites the Dust, and here's a bit where we did We Will Rock You, and here's us doing the Galileos.
Ticking every box.
Yeah, ticking every box as it went along. And it's just like, oh, here's a checklist of the things that happened without any sort of emotional resonance behind it.
But there was no dynamic between the band, I mean, group hugs and all that. They never group hugged in their life, it was nonsense. I think the band would fight like cat and dog. I mean, particularly Freddie and Brian, But according to that, I mean, Brian and Freddie never had a crossword in their life.
Yeah.
And Brian comes over as this angel, I actually think the guy who plays him is really, really good.
Yeah,
in the movie.
Probably.
I think he's the best performance.
Yeah.
I mean, even though Rami Malek got an Oscar, for me, knowing these people, that guy did a great job. And it's, of course, I'm very close to it. But then, I suppose, the kind of analogy I use and say to people, well, one of my favourite films of all time is Amadeus, and the film about Mozart. And I love it because I love classical music. I love Mozart. I love the setting. I love, the costume. I mean, the story, everything about that film I love. But if you interviewed Mozart's roadie, and he would probably say, well, he never used those kind of pianos, and he never wrote that concerto there, and he wasn't knocking that bird off, or whatever it might have been. So that didn't stop my enjoyment of the film. That was, 225 years ago or whatever.
Yeah.
But whereas this is in living history. But at the end of the day, you can't argue with $1 billion.
No, it's very difficult to argue with $1 billion. I don't know how you feel about this. This is how I would have liked to seen it end. Because the one thing I felt that film was lacking was actual Freddie Mercury and actual Queen. And they recreate Live Aid. But I think had the film have ended with the curtain behind the stage at Wembley Stadium and the band walking on stage and Freddie Mercury sitting down at the piano and his fingers just about to hit the keys, and then it was blackout, and then as the credits rolled you saw the actual footage of Live Aid.
Yeah,
that would have been.
I mean,
they built
this.
I've seen the.
They built the
stage
stage on an airfield somewhere, and yeah, I mean, it's not bad, but the equipment's all wrong. I mean, it's you're talking Hollywood movies. You're talking, and I mean, I know I'm going to be slightly pedantic because I was there, but it wouldn't have been difficult to get it right. That's the thing. It would not have been difficult. I mean, I remember seeing a clip and Roger was there on set and he said, well, these drums are wrong. I want them like they were at Live Aid. Well, then why don't you find the guy who's still around who set the drums up for Live Aid, But that would be too much work or whatever, And John's gear's all wrong. The piano's wrong. I mean, it's that detail for me that's disappointing, and it could have been got right. But yeah, I mean, the way it's recreated is pretty good, and that they don't do the whole set, which is, again, quite clever, because they had some of the songs earlier in the movie. And yeah, I mean, I've seen it. I saw it in the cinema, and I think I saw it on DVD, and they have the entire performance on the extras on the DVD.
Yes, they do, yeah.
But as I say, Fred, people say, oh, would Freddie have liked it? He would have loved $1 billion. He would have loved the fact that it was big and successful. Would he have liked the quality of it? No way. I
mean, we could talk, Peter.
I could still be working in a factory,
Yeah, exactly.
I could have been, a turner and fitter, or even foreman by now.
Exactly. So, I mean, an amazing 12-year period with Queen. That's good. As it says in the book. As I said at the start, Queen Unseen, My Life with the Greatest Rock Band of the 20th Century, is out right now. I'm sure there are many, many stories that we could talk about, but go and read the book. I don't want to get any
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming in, Peter. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
All right, so there you have it. That is the end of episode 1 of We Are the Road Crew. And without blowing my own trumpet too much, I think that's a pretty successful beginning. A man with some unbelievable stories. As I mentioned, I could have talked to Peter about Queen for... Actually, we could make this podcast probably 3 times longer than it actually was. I didn't say it at the start, but I got Queen Greatest Hits on tape when I was about 12, and I think I would credit that maybe with really changing my life and making me want to listen to rock music. Queen Greatest Hits 2 was the first CD I ever bought, so there is so many other things that I would have loved to talk to him about, but alas, we ran out of time. But I think we did pretty well in the time that we did have together. And if you are interested in hearing more of that stuff from Peter's long and distinguished career, then as I mentioned, Queen Unseen by Peter Hints is available on all formats now. He did actually say to me as he was leaving that the best format to buy it on is on paperback, because that's a kind of extended version. So if you want the full story of Peter's career, then go and check out Queen Unseen and get it on paperback. I think it's definitely worth a read. I've only kind of skim read it, so I'm going to settle down with a nice cup of tea and maybe put Hot Space on the stereo and read the book. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a review if you have. Subscribe to the podcast. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter at Road Crew Pod is where you can find us there. And do come back next week where we'll be talking to somebody else who, again, I'm sure has as many stories about life on the road with some incredible musicians. I'm not going to give away who we talk to every week, but let me just say that we do have a pretty amazing roster of people that we're going to be chatting to. So, hopefully you enjoyed this, and we will see you next week. Thanks very much for tuning in.